Dog becomes mother to abandoned lion cubs. Years later, their reunion will make you see why. The Wildwood Wildlife Sanctuary buzzed with excitement on a warm spring morning. Sirona, their prized lioness, had gone into labor during the night. The staff had been preparing for this moment for months, ensuring everything was perfect for the arrival of the new cubs. Dr. Emma Carter, the lead veterinarian, paced outside the specially designed birthing den. "Any updates, Tom?" she called to her assistant, who was monitoring the cameras. "She's done it, Dr. Carter," Tom exclaimed. "Two cubs. Both look healthy at first glance." Emma let out a sigh of relief. Breeding lions in captivity was always a delicate process, and Sirona was a first-time mother. The next few hours would be crucial. As the day progressed, however, Emma's relief turned to concern. Sirona showed no interest in her cubs. She didn't attempt to clean them or encourage them to nurse. The tiny cubs mewled pitifully, their cries growing weaker as the hours passed. "This isn't good," Emma muttered, watching the live feed. "She's rejecting them." By evening, it was clear that Sirona had failed to develop the necessary maternal instincts. The decision was made to intervene. Emma and her team carefully entered the den, using a partition to separate Sirona from the cubs. "It's okay, girl," Emma soothed as Sirona paced and growled on the other side of the partition. "We're just going to help your babies." The cubs were tiny, each fitting easily in the palm of Emma's hand. Their eyes were still closed, their fur damp and matted. Emma's heart ached for these helpless creatures. "Let's get them to the clinic," she instructed her team. "We need to start them on formula right away." Over the next few days, the sanctuary staff worked round the clock to care for the cubs. They were fed a special formula every 2 hours, kept warm, and monitored constantly. Despite their best efforts, the cubs weren't thriving as they should. "They're not gaining weight as quickly as I'd like," Emma confided to Tom one evening, her voice heavy with worry. "They need more than just food. They need the comfort and stimulation that only a mother can provide." As if on cue, Tom's phone buzzed with a notification. He glanced at it, then looked up at Emma with wide eyes. "Dr. Carter, you're not going to believe this. Remember my friend at the local animal shelter? They just got in a German Shepherd who recently gave birth. But her puppies didn't make it. The owner couldn't care for her and surrendered her to the shelter." Emma's mind raced with possibilities. It was an unconventional idea, perhaps even a bit crazy, but it might just work. "Tom, call your friend back. Ask if we can bring the dog here. I have an idea that might save these cubs." Within hours, a beautiful German Shepherd named Sandra arrived at the sanctuary. She was a gentle giant, her sad eyes telling the story of her recent loss. Emma knelt beside her, stroking her soft fur. "Hey there, Sandra," she said softly. "I know you've been through a lot, but I'm hoping you might be able to help us with something very special." Emma led Sandra to a quiet, comfortable room they had prepared. The lion cubs were there, nestled in a warm blanket. Sandra's ears perked up at the sound of their weak mewling, her maternal instincts immediately kicking in. Carefully, under the watchful eyes of Emma and her team, Sandra approached the cubs. She sniffed them gently, her tail wagging slightly. Then, to everyone's amazement, she lay down beside them, allowing the cubs to nuzzle against her. "Unbelievable," Tom whispered, watching as the cubs instinctively began to nurse. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "It's working," she breathed. "She's accepting them." As night fell on the sanctuary, a most unusual family settled in together. Sandra, the German Shepherd, curled protectively around two tiny lion cubs, her eyes alert but calm. The cubs, for the first time since their birth, slept peacefully, their tiny bodies pressed against Sandra's warm fur. Over the next few days, Emma and her team watched in amazement as Sandra took to her role as surrogate mother with remarkable dedication. She nursed the cubs, cleaned them, and provided the crucial warmth and comfort they needed. The change in the cubs was almost immediate. "Look at this," Emma said to Tom, pointing to the charts she'd been keeping. "Their weight gain has doubled since Sandra took over. And see how much more active they are. Indeed, the cubs were thriving under Sandra's care. They had begun to open their eyes, their tiny paws batting playfully at Sandra's tail. The dog seemed to have a new lease on life as well, her earlier sadness replaced by a sense of purpose. Word of this unusual arrangement spread quickly through the wildlife conservation community. Soon, the sanctuary was fielding calls from researchers and media outlets, all eager to learn more about the dog-fostering lion cubs. "We're going to have to name them soon," Tom remarked one afternoon as they watched Sandra gently guiding the cubs around their enclosure. "We can't keep calling them the cubs forever." Emma nodded, a smile playing on her lips. "I've been thinking about that. How about we call them Leo and Zuri? Leo for the boy and Zuri, which means beautiful in Swahili, for the girl." "Perfect," Tom agreed. "Leo, Zuri, and Sandra, our little miracle family." As the weeks passed, Leo and Zuri grew stronger and more active. They began to exhibit typical lion cub behaviors, play fighting with each other and pouncing on Sandra's tail. The dog took it all in stride, seemingly understanding that these were not ordinary puppies. Emma marveled at Sandra's instincts. "It's as if she knows exactly what they need," she commented to Tom. "She's stern when they get too rough, but so patient and gentle most of the time." However, as the cubs grew, new challenges arose. Their play became rougher, their teeth and claws sharper. Emma began to worry about Sandra's safety. "We always knew this arrangement would be temporary," she said during a team meeting. "The cubs are nearly 2 months old now. It might be time to start transitioning them to a more traditional lion enclosure." The decision was made to begin the transition slowly. They would introduce the cubs to a specially designed halfway enclosure, where they could start to acclimate to a more lion-like environment while still having supervised visits with Sandra. The day of the move was emotional for everyone. Sandra seemed to sense that something was changing. As the team prepared to move Leo and Zuri, she became agitated, whining and trying to herd the cubs away from the staff. "It's okay, girl," Emma soothed, kneeling beside Sandra. "You've done such an amazing job, but it's time for them to start learning how to be lions." With heavy hearts, they moved Leo and Zuri to their new enclosure. Sandra watched from behind a fence, her eyes never leaving the cubs. The cubs, for their part, seemed confused by their new surroundings. They paced the enclosure, occasionally calling out with small roars that sounded more like meows. Over the next few weeks, the team worked on helping Leo and Zuri adjust to their new life. They introduced toys that stimulated their natural hunting instincts and began to slowly transition their diet from milk to meat. Sandra was allowed supervised visits, which seemed to help ease the transition for everyone. During these visits, Leo and Zuri would bound over to her, rubbing against her legs and play biting her ears just as they had done when they were smaller. "It's remarkable," Emma observed during one of these visits. "They're clearly developing their lion instincts, but they still see Sandra as their mother." As Leo and Zuri grew, their lion characteristics became more pronounced. Their baby fur gave way to more adult coats, and their playful meows transformed into impressive roars. Yet, their bond with Sandra remained strong. 6 months after their birth, Leo and Zuri were fully weaned and eating an entirely meat-based diet. They had grown into healthy, active juvenile lions, their playful antics delighting visitors to the sanctuary. While they no longer needed Sandra's care, the bond between them remained strong. As Leo and Zuri approached their first birthday, Emma and her team faced a new set of challenges. The cubs were no longer cubs, but adolescent lions with growing strength and increasingly wild instincts. "We need to start thinking about their future," Emma said during a staff meeting. "They're too humanized to be released into the wild, but we need to ensure they can live as naturally as possible within the sanctuary." The team decided to begin reducing human interaction with Leo and Zuri, encouraging them to rely more on each other and their instincts. This meant fewer visits from Sandra as well, a decision that weighed heavily on everyone's hearts. Sandra seemed to sense the change. On her last regular visit, she spent extra time grooming Leo and Zuri, her eyes sad but understanding. The young lions, now nearly as big as Sandra, nuzzled against her, purring loudly. "It's like she's saying goodbye," Tom remarked, watching the scene with misty eyes. Emma nodded, her own eyes damp. "She's been an incredible mother. But it's time for them to be lions now." As the months passed, Leo and Zuri continued to grow and thrive. They were moved to a larger enclosure, complete with climbing structures, watering holes, and plenty of space to run and play. The sanctuary staff worked hard to create enrichment activities that would stimulate their natural behaviors. Sandra, while no longer a daily part of their lives, was not forgotten. The dog had become a permanent resident of the sanctuary, helping to socialize other rescued animals and becoming a favorite among the staff. Occasionally, when Sandra would walk past Leo and Zuri's enclosure, the lions would rush to the fence, vocalizing excitedly. It was clear they still recognized and remembered their foster mother. As Leo and Zuri's second birthday approached, the sanctuary received exciting news. A wildlife preserve in South Africa was interested in taking the pair as part of their breeding program. "It's an incredible opportunity," Emma explained to the team. "They would have acres of natural habitat to roam, and they could potentially contribute to conservation efforts for their species." While everyone agreed it was a wonderful chance for Leo and Zuri, the thought of saying goodbye was difficult. The lions had become beloved members of the sanctuary family. In the weeks leading up to the transfer, Emma noticed that Leo and Zuri seemed more restless than usual. They paced their enclosure, their vocalizations more frequent and intense. "I think they can sense something's changing," she confided to Tom. "I wish we could explain it to them." The day before Leo and Zuri were scheduled to leave, Emma had an idea. "Let's give Sandra a chance to say goodbye," she suggested. "One last visit for our unusual family." With careful preparation and multiple safety precautions in place, Sandra was brought to a secure area adjacent to Leo and Zuri's enclosure. As soon as the lions caught sight of her, they rushed to the fence, rumbling with loud purrs. Sandra's tail wagged furiously, her whole body quivering with excitement. Though it had been months since their last interaction, the bond between them was clearly as strong as ever. Under close supervision, Sandra was allowed into a protected contact area where Leo and Zuri could approach her through a mesh fence. What happened next left all the observers in tears. Leo and Zuri, now massive compared to Sandra, gently pressed against the fence, trying to nuzzle the dog just as they had done as cubs. Sandra, for her part, licked their faces through the mesh, her tail wagging nonstop. "It's incredible," Tom whispered. "After all this time, after how much they've grown, they still recognize her as their mom." Emma nodded, too choked up to speak. The scene before her was a powerful reminder of the depth and complexity of animal relationships, transcending species boundaries and defying human expectations. As the visit came to an end, Sandra seemed reluctant to leave. She kept looking back at Leo and Zuri, whining softly. The lions, too, paced along the fence, watching Sandra until she was out of sight. "Do you think they understand this is goodbye?" Tom asked softly. Emma shook her head, wiping away a tear. "I don't know, but I think they feel the significance of this moment, even if they can't understand it the way we do." The day of Leo and Zuri's departure dawned bright and clear. The sanctuary was a flurry of activity as final preparations were made for the lions' long journey to South Africa. Emma supervised the loading process, her heart heavy with a mixture of pride and sadness. Leo and Zuri, sedated for their own safety during transport, lay peacefully in their specially designed crates. "They look so small again," Tom remarked, peering into the crates. "It's hard to believe they're the same tiny cubs Sandra nursed 2 years ago." Emma nodded, gently stroking Zuri's fur through the bars of the crate. "They've come so far. I just hope they'll be happy in their new home." As the truck prepared to leave, carrying Leo and Zuri to the airport, Emma noticed Sandra sitting quietly by the sanctuary's main building, her eyes fixed on the vehicle. "She knows," Emma said softly to Tom. "Somehow she understands they're leaving." The staff gathered to wave goodbye as the truck pulled away. Sandra let out a soft whine, and Emma knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around the dog's shoulders. "It's okay, girl," she murmured. "You did good. They're going to have a wonderful life because of you." The following weeks were an adjustment for everyone at the sanctuary. The absence of Leo and Zuri was keenly felt, especially by those who had been most involved in their care. Sandra seemed subdued, often going to the now empty enclosure and lying by the fence. Emma made sure to give Sandra extra attention during this time, taking her on long walks and involving her in other sanctuary activities. Slowly, the German Shepherd's spirits seemed to lift. A month after Leo and Zuri's departure, the sanctuary received its first update from the South African Reserve. The email included several photos of the lions exploring their new habitat. "Look at them," Emma exclaimed, showing the pictures to the team. "They look so happy and healthy." The photos showed Leo and Zuri roaming vast grasslands, lounging in the shade of acacia trees, and even interacting with other lions from a distance. It was clear they were adapting well to their new environment. "Should we show Sandra?" Tom asked, glancing at the German Shepherd who was napping nearby. Emma considered for a moment, then nodded. "I think we should. She was such a big part of their lives. It feels right to share this with her too." They called Sandra over and held up a tablet displaying the photos. To their amazement, Sandra's ears perked up immediately. She studied the images intently, her tail beginning to wag. "She recognizes them," Tom said in awe. "Even in these new surroundings, she knows her babies." Emma felt a lump in her throat. The bond between this dog and the lions she had raised was truly extraordinary. As life at the sanctuary settled into a new normal, Emma found herself reflecting on the incredible journey they had all been through. She decided to write up the story of Sandra, Leo, and Zuri for the sanctuary's newsletter. The response was overwhelming. The story quickly went viral, touching hearts around the world. Soon, the sanctuary was fielding calls from major news outlets, all wanting to tell the heartwarming tale of the dog who raised lions. "I never expected this," Emma said to Tom as they scrolled through the flood of supportive messages and donations pouring in. "Sandra's story is inspiring so many people." The increased attention brought new opportunities for the sanctuary. They were able to expand their facilities and take in more animals in need. Sandra became something of a celebrity, with visitors often requesting to meet the famous lion-raising dog. Through it all, Sandra remained her gentle, loving self. She continued to help socialize rescued animals and seemed to have a particular affinity for big cat cubs that sometimes came into the sanctuary's care. 1 year after Leo and Zuri's departure, the sanctuary received an exciting invitation. The South African Reserve was opening a new educational center, and they wanted Sandra to be a special guest at the opening ceremony. "What do you think, girl?" Emma asked Sandra, kneeling down to her level. "Want to go see your lion babies?" Sandra's tail wagged furiously, as if she understood every word. Emma laughed, scratching behind the dog's ears. "I'll take that as a yes." The journey to South Africa was long, but Sandra proved to be an excellent traveler. She remained calm throughout the flights, winning over flight attendants and fellow passengers with her gentle demeanor. Upon arriving at the reserve, Emma and Sandra were greeted by Dr. Themba Nkosi, the head zoologist. "Welcome to Savannah Hope Reserve," he said warmly. "We're so excited to have you here, especially you, Sandra. Your story has inspired many of our conservation efforts." As they drove through the reserve, Emma marveled at the vast expanse of African wilderness. Herds of impala grazed in the distance, and a family of elephants ambled across the road ahead of them. "Leo and Zuri have adapted remarkably well," Dr. Nkosi explained as they drove. "They've become an integral part of our pride here. In fact, Zuri is expecting cubs of her own in a few months." Emma felt a surge of pride. "That's wonderful news. I can't wait to see them." They arrived at a large open-air enclosure. Dr. Nkosi explained that while Leo and Zuri roamed freely in a larger area most of the time, they had been brought to this smaller enclosure for the reunion to ensure everyone's safety. As they approached, Emma felt Sandra tense beside her. The dog's ears were perked forward, her nose twitching as she took in the familiar yet different scents. And then they saw them. Leo and Zuri, now fully grown lions, lay in the shade of an acacia tree. They were magnificent, their golden coats gleaming in the African sun. "Oh my," Emma breathed, tears springing to her eyes. "They're beautiful," Dr. Nkosi smiled. "They truly are. Now, let's see if they remember their foster mom." Carefully, following all safety protocols, Sandra was allowed into a protected contact area adjacent to the lion's enclosure. At first, Leo and Zuri seemed more curious than anything else, watching the newcomers with mild interest. But then, Sandra let out a soft whine. The effect was immediate. Both lions' heads snapped up, their eyes focusing intently on the German Shepherd. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a grace that belied their size, Leo and Zuri rose and padded towards the fence. Their movements were cautious but deliberate, tails swishing gently behind them. As they drew closer, Sandra's tail began to wag furiously. She pressed herself against the fence, whining softly. Leo was the first to reach her, his massive head lowering to her level. He sniffed carefully, then, to everyone's amazement, let out a deep, rumbling purr. Zuri joined her brother, and soon both lions were rubbing against the fence, trying to get as close to Sandra as possible. The dog, for her part, was beside herself with joy, her whole body wiggling as she tried to lick the lions through the fence. "This is incredible," Dr. Nkosi murmured, his scientific detachment momentarily forgotten in the face of this extraordinary reunion. The bond between them is still so strong. Emma could barely speak, too overcome with emotion at the sight before her. The family she had helped create, against all odds, was together again. Different species, separated by thousands of miles and years of growth. Yet the love between them was undeniable. For over an hour, Sandra, Leo, and Zuri remained close to each other, communicating in their own unique way. The lions purred and rubbed against the fence, while Sandra wagged and whined, her eyes never leaving her adopted cubs. As the African sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Dr. Nkosi gently suggested it was time to end the visit. "We don't want to overstimulate them," he explained. "This has been a big day for everyone." Reluctantly, Emma agreed. As they prepared to leave, Sandra seemed hesitant, looking back at Leo and Zuri with longing. "It's okay, girl," Emma soothed, kneeling beside Sandra. "We'll come back tomorrow. They're not going anywhere." As they walked away, both Leo and Zuri let out soft roars, as if saying goodbye. Sandra's ears perked up at the sound, and she answered with a gentle bark of her own. Over the next week, Sandra visited Leo and Zuri daily. Each reunion was as touching as the first, with the lions showing clear recognition and affection for their former foster mother. The reserve staff were amazed by the ongoing bond between the species. "We've never seen anything quite like this," Dr. Nkosi remarked to Emma as they watched another heartwarming interaction. "It's changing the way we think about animal relationships and cognitive abilities." Inspired by Sandra's story and the ongoing connection between the dog and lions, the reserve decided to create a special program focused on interspecies bonds and animal cognition. They named it the Sandra Initiative. As their visit drew to a close, Emma found herself reflecting on the incredible journey they had all been through. From those first desperate days when Leo and Zuri were rejected by their biological mother, to Sandra stepping in as an unlikely savior, to this moment watching the now-adult lions nuzzle affectionately against the fence, trying to get as close as possible to their canine foster mom. On their last day at the reserve, Dr. Nkosi had a surprise for them. "We've prepared a special area where Sandra can have direct contact with Leo and Zuri," he explained. "We've assessed the risks and believe it's safe for a brief, supervised interaction." Emma's heart raced with both excitement and nervousness. "Are you sure it's safe?" Dr. Nkosi nodded confidently. "We've been observing their behavior all week. The lions are clearly non-aggressive towards Sandra. We'll have trained staff ready to intervene if necessary, but I don't anticipate any issues. With careful preparation, Sandra was led into a secure enclosure. Leo and Zuri were then allowed in, under the watchful eyes of the reserve staff. For a moment, everyone held their breath. The lions approached Sandra slowly, their movements deliberate but gentle. Sandra stood her ground, tail wagging softly. Then, in a moment that brought tears to everyone's eyes, Leo lowered his massive head and gently rubbed it against Sandra's side. Zuri followed suit, and soon Sandra was sandwiched between two purring lions, her tail wagging furiously as she licked their faces. "Extraordinary," Dr. Nkosi whispered. "Simply extraordinary." The interaction lasted for about 15 minutes before the staff decided to end it on a positive note. As Sandra was let out, both Leo and Zuri followed her to the gate, rumbling softly as if asking her not to leave. That evening, as Emma and Sandra prepared for their journey home, Dr. Nkosi approached them with a proposal. "We'd like Sandra to be the official ambassador for our new program," he said. "It would involve a few visits a year to help us continue our research and to inspire visitors with her incredible story." Emma looked at Sandra, who was contentedly chewing on a new toy the reserve staff had given her. "What do you think, girl? Up for a few trips to Africa every year?" Sandra's tail thumped against the floor in what Emma chose to interpret as agreement. As they boarded their flight home the next day, Emma felt a sense of completion. What had started as a desperate attempt to save two rejected lion cubs had blossomed into something far greater. A story of love that transcended species, a catalyst for new scientific understanding, and a source of inspiration for people around the world. Sandra settled into her special seat on the plane. The airline had been more than happy to accommodate the now-famous dog, and Emma scratched behind her ears. "You've done so much good, girl," she murmured. "More than you'll ever know." Back at Wildwood Wildlife Sanctuary, Sandra was welcomed home like a returning hero. The staff had prepared a special celebration, complete with a dog-friendly cake and new toys. But what touched Emma the most was the unveiling of a new plaque at the entrance of the sanctuary. It read, "Dedicated to Sandra, whose love knew no bounds. She taught us that family is not defined by species, but by the heart." Emma felt tears welling up in her eyes as she read the plaque. Sandra, sensing her emotion, pressed against her leg comfortingly. In the months that followed, life at the sanctuary took on a new rhythm. Sandra's story had brought increased attention and resources to Wildwood, allowing them to expand their rescue and rehabilitation efforts. Emma found herself juggling her veterinary duties with frequent speaking engagements and media interviews, all eager to hear about the dog who raised lions. Sandra, for her part, seemed to take her newfound fame in stride. She continued her work at the sanctuary, helping to socialize rescued animals and providing comfort to those in distress. Her gentle nature and patience made her particularly effective with young or traumatized animals. One crisp autumn morning, as Emma was doing her rounds, she received an urgent call from a local farmer. A litter of orphaned wolf pups had been found in a den near his property, their mother likely killed by poachers. "Bring them in immediately," Emma instructed, her mind already racing with preparations. When the tiny pups arrived, they were in poor condition, dehydrated, hungry, and terrified. As Emma and her team worked to stabilize them, Sandra watched attentively from the corner of the room, her eyes never leaving the small, whimpering bundles. Once the pups were stable,
Emma fasta familiar dell'Eme.
The pups needed more than just medical care. They needed the nurturing and socialization that only a mother could provide. "What do you think, Sandra?" Emma asked, kneeling beside the German shepherd. "Ready to be a mom again?" Sandra's tail wagged gently, and she approached the pups with the same calm, nurturing energy she had shown Leo and Zuri years ago. Under Emma's watchful eye, Sandra began to clean and comfort the wolf pups, who quickly snuggled up to her warm body. "Well, I'll be," Tom said, watching the scene unfold. "Looks like we've got ourselves another miracle in the making." Over the next few weeks, Sandra once again proved her extraordinary capacity for interspecies motherhood. She nursed the pups, played with them, and even began to teach them basic behaviors. The pups thrived under her care, growing stronger and more active every day. News of Sandra's new charges spread quickly, and soon the sanctuary was fielding calls from wildlife researchers and conservationists from around the world. Many were eager to study this unique situation and learn more about interspecies fostering. "You know," Emma said to Tom one day as they watched Sandra gently guiding the pups through a game of tug-of-war, "I think we've stumbled onto something really important here. Sandra's ability to nurture across species lines could have huge implications for wildlife conservation." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "It's like she's breaking down barriers we didn't even know existed. Makes you wonder what other preconceptions we might need to challenge in animal care." As the wolf pups grew, Emma and her team began to prepare for their eventual release back into the wild. It was a bittersweet process, much like it had been with Leo and Zuri. Sandra seemed to understand that her role was temporary, but her dedication never wavered. The day of the release was emotional for everyone at the sanctuary. The pups, now strong and healthy young wolves, were transported to a remote area known for its stable wolf population. Sandra was allowed to accompany them to the release site, a decision Emma felt was important for both the dog and the wolves. As the crates were opened and the young wolves took their first tentative steps into their new home, Sandra watched attentively. The wolves lingered for a moment, looking back at their canine foster mother. Then, with a series of yips and howls, they bounded off into the forest. Sandra stood at the edge of the clearing, her ears perked forward, watching until the last wolf disappeared from sight. Emma knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around the dog's shoulders. "You did it again, girl," she said softly. "You gave them a chance at life. You should be so proud." As they drove back to the sanctuary, Emma's mind was already turning to the future. Sandra's successes with Leo, Zuri, and now the wolf pups had opened up new possibilities in wildlife rehabilitation. As the years passed, Sandra's remarkable ability to foster and nurture animals across species lines became legendary in the wildlife conservation community. The Sandra method, as it came to be known, was adopted by sanctuaries and wildlife rehabilitation centers around the world, saving countless orphaned and rejected animals. On Sandra's 10th anniversary at Wildwood Wildlife Sanctuary, a special celebration was held. Conservationists, scientists, and animal lovers from across the globe gathered to honor the extraordinary German Shepherd who had changed the face of wildlife rehabilitation. The highlight of the event was a video call with the Savannah Hope Reserve in South Africa. On a large screen, Emma, Sandra, and all the guests watched as Leo and Zuri, now majestic adult lions, roamed their territory. Zuri had cubs of her own, continuing the legacy of love that Sandra had started. As Sandra watched the screen, her tail wagging gently, Emma knelt beside her faithful friend, now gray around the muzzle but still full of love. "Look at that, Sandra," Emma said softly. "That's all because of you. You've changed so many lives, human and animal alike." The event concluded with the unveiling of a new wing at the sanctuary dedicated to interspecies fostering and rehabilitation. The Sandra Wing would serve as a center for research, education, and hands-on care for animals in need. As the sun set on the celebration, Emma found Sandra sitting quietly by the sanctuary's lake, watching the golden light play on the water. She sat down beside the dog, reflecting on the incredible journey they had shared. "You know, girl," Emma said, scratching behind Sandra's ears, "when I first brought you here to help with those lion cubs, I never imagined where it would lead. You've taught us all so much about love, compassion, and the connections that exist between all living things." Sandra leaned into Emma's touch, her warm brown eyes full of contentment and understanding. In that moment, surrounded by the sounds of the sanctuary at dusk, Emma felt a profound sense of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought this extraordinary dog into her life. As they walked back to the main building together, Emma knew that while Sandra might not live forever, her legacy of love and her impact on the world of wildlife conservation would endure for generations to come.